Well, we're working through a series in the book of Moses, and we're taking a break from Moses today. We're going to take another break in March, and we're going to take a break at Easter. So a couple breaks along the way. But today we're taking a break for something that's very dear to me. I call it C.O.R. It stands for Community Outreach and Evangelism. Community Outreach and Evangelism. And something that should be important to all of us. We're going to see a couple videos, one early on and one at the end. We're going to start with one I'm going to show you right now. It just shows kind of a practical way that we often miss, but could take advantage of opportunities to reach other people.
I'll be inside in a minute. I'm going to say hey to Joe. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mike.
Flower beds are looking good, neighbor.
Yep. You guys just get back from church?
Yeah, just been at the church house.
I wonder why he never invites me to church. I mean, I'd go if he asked me to go. But this is the way it is. I'm out in my front yard when he comes home from church. It's always so awkward.
It's so awkward, and I'm so hungry. Ugh. I think my wife made goulash. I love goulash. Oh, maybe Joe would like some goulash for lunch. Hey, Joe.
Here comes the invitation to church.
Yeah?
You want to come over
Sure,
for
I'd love to go to
goulash?
church with you.
What'd you just say?
What'd you just say?
No, what?
No, what'd you say? What'd
No,
you
what
say?
did you say?
You said something about God. God.
Goo.
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 Goo. Goulash.
Goulash?
Goulash. It's a...
You're having goulash at your church?
No, at my house.
You're inviting me over for goulash?
Yeah.
At your goulash? Yeah, who doesn't like goulash? I like some goulash. Yeah, sign me up. Goulash.
I'll check and make sure we have enough.
I see you walking away.
Now, Jake, should I leave that on or turn it down? Turn it down? Okay. Good. Upside down. There. Yeah, let's kill that for a second. He's going to cue up what we're going to need in just a little bit. It shouldn't be that difficult. Yesterday, I went into a gas station, and it was on a busy road. And you'd think there'd be people out and about, and there'd be people in the gas station waiting to pay besides myself. But I went in, and I realized I was the only person in there except for the person working there. And I asked them a couple of questions, and then I said, "Do you go to church somewhere?" And they said, I used to, but I haven't been in about 5 months. And I said, "Well, where do you go?" And they said, "Well, I really like my church." And they told me where they went. But they hadn't been invited. And in 5 months, they'd been away. Nobody had invited them in. And then they said, I'm pretty religious. And I said, "Well, we're not called to be religious." And then I was able to actually share with her. It's about a life entrusted to Jesus. And she said, "Yeah, I've done that. I use the word religious because that's what people understand." But nobody in 5 months had invited this person to church after she got away from church. And some people spend months, maybe even years out of church before anybody invites them to church or tells them about Jesus or encourages them to be growing spiritually. So, Jake, I need that back on now. Is that right? I'm going to do this. Listen, last year I did a service where part of the service I showed some extinct animals. And this is an extinct animal. And I said, last year when I did this message, I mentioned that there could be a time when Christians are an extinct animal, when we're no more, because we haven't passed the torch on, we haven't brought anybody else up behind us, and we just kind of fade away. Christians could one day be extinct. Although this is a sobering thought, and it can be motivation to reach others, it shouldn't be the best motivation to just say, "Well, I don't want us to be extinct, so I'm going to make sure I make another Christian or two or lead another person to the Lord." That's some motivation, but it should not be the only motivation. There are other good reasons that we should be concerned about seeing people come to Christ. One of them is that we don't want others to go to hell. That's the biggest motivation factor for me. I was sitting with a person recently, and they told me they were thinking about being in the mission field, and I asked them why, and they said they like different climates and this and that, and I said, look, you see that person over there? And they said, yeah. I said, that person, when they're all done living, is going to either heaven or hell. Does that concern you? And they said, never thought about it. Before you go to the mission field, maybe you should consider that. I had somebody contact me years ago, and they wanted to know if we could possibly support them going to the mission field. And I said, well, when was the last time you shared your faith? And he said, well, I don't do that. Why would I support you to go somewhere else when you're not sharing the faith right here in your own community, in your own neighborhood, maybe in your own family, your own workplace? So that we don't want others to go to hell. In John 14:6, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If we believe that people need to come to Christ in order to avoid going to hell, we should be trying to bring people to Christ. Acts 4:12. And I know some of you know these verses. Nor is there salvation in any other, for there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. If you're going to be saved, you can't be saved by just being a good person, by going to church once in a while, by saying a prayer, by walking an aisle, by carrying a Bible, by getting a church membership. It's a relationship with Jesus Christ, and nothing else saves us. If we believe that that's the only way to avoid going to hell, we should be sharing with others. Another reason we should be sharing with others is that we want to be obedient to God. We just want to be obedient to God. Mark 16:15, Jesus speaking, and he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Anywhere they'll listen, be preaching. They might reject, but keep preaching. That's your job. That's your role. He doesn't even say make them get saved or lead them to salvation. Preach the gospel. Let them have the opportunity. Put the ball in their court at least. Give them the ball at least. Let them see it. Preach the gospel to every creature. Another reason we should be wanting to share the gospel, number 3, is that we want to follow the example set by Christ. If Jesus did it, that's what I want to do. Not necessarily walking on water and raising dead and turning water into wine, but if Jesus loved people, I want to love people. If Jesus was forgiving, I want to be forgiving. If Jesus was concerned for souls, I want to be concerned for souls. Read this in Luke chapter 19. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And I shared this just a couple months ago. Jesus did not leave heaven and come to earth to give us a holiday or an excuse for a day off, but to see saved people, lost people get saved. Yeah, to see saved people ultimately. See lost people get saved. If that was his biggest concern, that should be our concern. Number 4, we want to follow the example set by Christ's followers, his very first followers. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22, the Apostle Paul writing, he says this, to the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Sometimes I stepped out of my comfort zone and did things with other people so that I can rub shoulders with these people for the opportunity of sharing the gospel. Now, I don't think we need to go to the bar and sit beside somebody and drink beer in order to share the gospel. But maybe it means working beside somebody that's working out in the field, walking with a farmer, fishing with the fishermen, playing basketball with the youth in the playground, sharing Christ with those around us. Where we have opportunity and looking for opportunities to even step out of our comfort zone so that we can share the gospel. I had a kid in my very first youth group. He raced motorcycles. I had no interest in that. But in order to gain an audience with him, I had to be involved in that a little bit. Go watch him compete, and it was noisy, and I didn't care for it much, but it gave me an opportunity to talk with him. I've been to a whole lot of things I didn't enjoy, but it gave me an opportunity and an audience to share the gospel with somebody, and that should be the concern for all of us. Again, I'm no super Christian. There's no S on my chest. That should be the concern for each and every one of us. 1 Corinthians 1:17, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom of words, lest the cross of Christ should be made of no effect. If I can lead someone to accept the gospel because I got fancy words and I can debate them and out-argue them, that's not what it's all about. We are called just to give the truth of Christ. Not necessarily to talk fancy with big words, but just to present the cross, the resurrection, and the hope that comes from Jesus Christ. That's what we're called to do. It takes less than 30 seconds to tell you what we're called to do. Less than a minute to write it down. Why do we fail so miserably? There's some common excuses. We make excuses why we don't. Why we're not sharing with anybody. Why we just went a whole week without sharing with anybody. A whole month, maybe a whole year without sharing with anybody. And we make excuses. Some common excuses. I'm too busy to be concerned with sharing the gospel. I'm just really, really busy right now. It's a busy time in my life. I'd be sharing with my neighbor if I had the opportunity, but I'm too busy. I'm too busy. Listen, if we met someone, I'm sorry, let's try this. If we let someone drown in our pool because we were busy mowing the lawn, I see that, okay, that little kid's drowning, but I'm busy, what would you think of me? I let somebody die in my backyard because I'm too busy. I'm busy mowing my lawn or fixing in the garden or whatever it might be, and I'm too busy to concern myself with that person. That's kind of what we're saying when we say we're too busy to be concerned with that person's soul. I'm too busy to share the gospel with that person. Got a lot going on. Got to get up at this time of day. I'm up to this hour of night. I'm just too busy. And meanwhile, people are dying and going to hell all around us. We're busy. We're busy. Another excuse that's pretty common is, I'm just too shy to share the gospel. I'm too shy. I can't really talk to people. I don't know how to start a conversation. I can't do it. I'm shy. I'm shy. If someone didn't tell someone else that their house was on fire because they were too shy, what would you think of that person? If I was driving by your house at midnight tonight and I see that your house is on fire and I drive in and I park the car and think about running to the door and think, I'm just too shy to tell them. I'm too shy to tell them their house is on fire and they're about to be burned up. How does that sound? I'm too shy to share with somebody that they're in trouble. That they're in trouble. Another excuse is, I just don't know how. I don't know how. If you have a genuine concern, by the way, man, I did this really bad when I first got saved. It's kind of like just about anything else we do. Trial and error, we learn how to do it. When I first got saved, I came back from the military and I went to my family and I said, do you know you're going to hell? That didn't go over real good, like a lead balloon. I learned to say things like, did you know Jesus died for you? Did you know Jesus cared for you? Do you have a relationship with Jesus? Did you know you're going to hell isn't a really good way to start things, okay? But find a way. Maybe you don't know how, but if you really want to do it, you'll find a way. Sometimes through trial and error, you can do it through books. There are all kinds of ways, pamphlets, tracts, all kinds of things, seminars, books, articles, online. You can go and say, how can I share the gospel? They'll tell you 10 different ways to do it. I'm going to show you some today. Another excuse sometimes we do is, I serve God in a different way. I serve God in this way. I teach Sunday school, or I mow the grass, or I do whatever it might be at the church, so I don't really got to share the gospel. I'm exempt for that. I share in a different way, so I don't got to share this way. Kind of like saying, I obey all these laws, so it's okay if I commit murder. Because I didn't speed, and I didn't rob anybody. All I did was commit murder. I violated this one little part. I ignored that one little instruction by God that tells us we should be sharing the gospel with others. Like saying I only disobeyed one law. I want to try something. I want you to take a second to just think about the best thing that happened to you in 2013. Not even 2 months behind us now, 2013. Take a second and just think about what was one of the best things that happened. It could have been maybe going to a movie, amusement park. It could have been a day off. It could have been, a day in the park, a day on the water, a day at the beach, whatever it might be. Think about one of the best things that happened to you in 2013. One of the best things that happened to you in 2013. Did you share that with anybody? Now, I don't know if you did or you didn't, but there's an old marketing claim that says this: when something great happens to somebody, they share it with 7.4 people. Now, I don't know how you get that 0.4, but if you sell me a dishwasher that I'm really pleased with, I'm going to tell 7 other people that I got this dishwasher that I'm really pleased with. So when we get something really great happen to us, generally speaking, we'll tell about 7 other people. Generally speaking, we'll tell about 7 other people. If you are saved, chances are you shared that with somebody along the way. Somewhere in life you probably shared that with somebody, but this is good news that never goes out of style. It never stops being good news. It's always the best news in my life. It was the best news yesterday. It's going to be the best news tomorrow, is that I have a saving relationship with Jesus Christ and I'm going to heaven. So it's always good news. So I should always be sharing. Sadly, when it comes to telling others about salvation, we don't share with many people, at least not for very long. When it comes to telling others about great things that happen to us, we'll share with 7 people, except the exception is about salvation. And maybe we did initially, but it never stops being great news, so that should continue on. Listen to these statistics. 80% churchgoers believe they are responsible to share the gospel. 80% believe they are responsible to share the gospel. 75% say they could effectively share the gospel. I could share the gospel if I had an opportunity with somebody. I could do it. 75% of the people say they could do it. 39% actually ever share their faith. 75 say they believe they could do it if they had to. 39% say they actually have or do. 21% pray for the spiritual welfare of others. 21% pray for other people to get saved. And again, I am no Superman, but I've been praying twice a day for my unsaved family for almost 30 years now. And don't see that as, wow, pastor's great, because he's not. That's something you should be and could be doing. But only 21% pray for the spiritual welfare of others. 20% never pray for the welfare of another person in their whole life, not even a sick person. 20% never have prayed for the welfare of anyone. 95% of people in church have never led anyone to the Lord. 95% of people inside churches today have never led someone else to the Lord. Do you wonder why I say we could be an extinct animal someday? Listen, if the church people aren't doing it, who's doing it? You know, the bartender's probably not doing it. The drug dealer's probably not doing it. 95% of people in church never led anyone else to the Lord. 48% have never invited anyone to church. That's about half. 48% never even invited anybody to church. If you're not really comfortable sharing, and you should be, but you can always invite someone to church, but 48% have never invited anyone to church. Less than 20% of Christians have ever had any spiritual conversation with anyone outside of their own church. They'll talk to other people that maybe haven't been in church in a few weeks and say, miss seeing you, wish you'd come back. But don't share with somebody outside of their church. And listen to this statistic. The majority of people sitting in churches this morning are unsaved, or at least cannot give a clear presentation of how they got saved. It's amazing how many people I meet that, well, you know, I'm a pretty good person. I used to be religious. I got baptized once. Never bring Christ into the equation. How many people cannot tell you that it takes Jesus Christ to get to heaven? Who could not say, I've given my life to Jesus Christ and I'm trusting Him to get me to heaven? The majority of people sitting in churches today cannot do that. That's a sad statistic. And by the way, if you're here this morning and you're trusting in anything else aside from a relationship with Jesus Christ, anything besides your life committed to Jesus Christ, you're trusting in the wrong thing. He wouldn't have came here if we could have got there any other way. We need Jesus Christ to get to heaven. But the majority of people sitting in churches today can't tell you that. And maybe don't even know that. And they're unsaved. I had a professor at Bible college who said that if the rapture happened on a Sunday morning, if God calls all of the Christians into heaven on a Sunday morning, a lot of churches would never know. Now, I'd like to think our church would be empty. If God called all the Christians home in the next 60 seconds, I'd love to think nobody's sitting here. But that's not what statistics tell us. The majority of people in churches are unsaved. That's why we give the invitation so often, almost every week. Almost every week I give the invitation. Year after year after year, these statistics are presented in churches across the country. And year after year after year, they remain largely unchanged. People continue to not share, to not witness, to not invite. Why is that? There's only one of two reasons. Number one, we don't really care what God wants us to do. Yeah, I see what God wants us to do. I'm not doing it. Just not that big a deal to me. Number one is we don't care or we don't believe. Yeah, but maybe that part of the Bible really wasn't written by God's Spirit. I'm not sure I believe that part, that I'm supposed to be busy. You only got two options. I don't care or I don't believe. I don't think there's any other option. There aren't any other option. There's plenty of verses that tell us we should be doing this. Matthew 9:37. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. Jesus said, pray. Pray for workers. Ideally, with yourself being the first one. Lord, help me to be good at this. Lord, help me to have a concern for the unsaved. Lord, help me to be able to share your truths with others around me. And help others in our church to be soul winners and to be concerned with salvation. 2 Corinthians 5:20. Now then, we are ambassadors for Christ, or we represent Christ. When you're an ambassador, you represent the one you're an ambassador for. We are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf to be reconciled to God. I'm an ambassador for Christ. I represent him, and I've got a message from him. Be reconciled to God through Jesus Christ. And I'd love to share with you how you can do that. 1 Corinthians 9:22. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all men, that I might by all means win some. I talked about this a little bit ago, about purposely stepping out of your comfort zone for an opportunity or a chance to share with somebody else. I love this verse in Colossians 4. The Apostle Paul wants people to pray that he does this well. Colossians 4:3, meanwhile, praying also for us that God would open to us a door for the word, to speak the mystery of Christ, for which I am also in chains, that I may make it manifest as I ought to speak. Now let me clear that up a little bit. The word manifest is the Greek word phanero. It means just to make clear or to light up, to shine a light on. Pray that I can shine a light on the gospel. Pray that I can make this clear to people that I work with, people I talk with, people in my family. Pray that I can share the gospel well. I've shared this story a handful of times, and I love this story. I'm going to share it again. In my young adult years, we met on Tuesday nights, and we had a girl in our group named Becky Noel. Her uncle was a pastor, and Becky worked at the hospital. And we're doing prayer requests, and she says, pray that this week I get an opportunity to share the gospel with somebody. So when we closed in prayer, we wrote them down, and then we prayed through the prayers, and Lord, help Becky to have an opportunity this week to share the gospel with somebody. Now, this is on Tuesday. Wednesday, she goes to work in the hospital. She gets in the elevator to go up to the floor she works on. One other person gets in the elevator, and the door shuts. And the other person says, is your name Becky? Yes, my name's Becky. And isn't your uncle a pastor? Yeah, my uncle's a pastor. Well, what does he believe? And Becky's thinking, oh my goodness, we just prayed for this last night. Pray for opportunities to share the gospel. Pray for opportunities for yourself and for others to be able to share the gospel, to make it clear, to light it up. Paul asked that people would pray that he would be able to effectively present the gospel with his words. That should be the desire for each and every one of us. Listen, I said I was going to show you some ways to present the gospel, and I'm going to do that this morning. I'm going to use scripture for this first one. John chapter 4, verses 6 through 10. I'm just going to read this through, and then we're going to take it apart a little bit. John chapter 4, verse 6. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman of Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, now he's going to start the conversation here, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. Then the woman of Samaria said to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. You Jews think you're better than us. You're too good for us. You're the people of God. Jesus answered and said to her, if you knew the gift of God, and he who it is that says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now there's just 3 little points here that we can take away. 3 little points that are a great lesson here. Number 1 is he talked to her one-on-one. You know what? If you show up at the parking lot or a playground or somewhere tomorrow, a basketball court, whatever it might be, probably not outside with the snow like this, you show up, there's a group of people and try to talk about Jesus, people might mock you, people might make fun of you. It could happen anyway. But one-on-one, people are a whole lot more open. They come with questions. Why did my uncle die? Or why did my daughter die? Or why did God let this happen? Or what do you think about this? And don't get on a rabbit trail. That's a good point, too. If I teach Korea in the fall, and I probably will, I'll give you some other tips. But people say, well, do you really think there's leprechauns? You know what? You got to move past that and say, that's not what I'm here to talk about. It's not what I want to talk to you about. But one-on-one works best. One-on-one works best. And Jesus does that with this woman here. If you read through the Gospel of John, pay attention to the times where Jesus talks to somebody one-on-one alone. You got Nicodemus in John chapter 3. That brings us to John 3:16. Here you got the woman at the well. Jesus talks to people when they're all alone. So one-on-one is good. Start in the natural realm. Give me a drink of water. Start in the natural realm and then moved on to the spiritual realm. One-on-one. Let's look at these one at a time. One-on-one, when people are alone, they are more likely to be open and honest with you. All right? Start in the natural world. It can be anything. It can be about the weather. Man, what a snowstorm we're having. It can be about sports cars. You know, I was at the auto show last week and I saw this. Whatever it might be. It can be about the Super Bowl. Start in the natural realm. Start in the natural realm. Those are really cool glasses you got. Hey, I like your boots. Start a conversation in the natural realm and move it to the spiritual realm. Hey, do you go to church somewhere? Hey, do you ever listen to Christian music? Pam and I have a stack of Christian CDs that are just there for the giving away when we get in conversation with people and it comes to a close and we say, hey, can we give you something to listen to? But do you go to church somewhere? Do you ever listen to Christian music? Have you ever heard of, whatever it might be, Max Lucado or Billy Graham or Andy Stanley? Have you ever heard of this person? They say, no. Can I tell you a little bit about them? And I was listening to them the other day and something that they shared. But you go from natural realm to spiritual realm. It can be very, very easy to do. And I said this before. I can look out a window at a road and say, look, there's a purple truck and there's a blue Volkswagen. Cars are so very different. Man, there's millions of different kinds. You know, God makes people different. Do you know God? Do you know anything about God? Oh, did I just go from cars to God in like 10 seconds? Yeah, you can do that. You can do that. Another method involves asking questions, simply asking questions. Matthew 16, verse 15, we read this. But he said to them, but who do you say that I am? Get them to tell you what they think. This also shows that you value their thoughts, and it can lead them to considering other things. One man did a then what method. Then what method? It worked something like this. So what are you going to do when we're done playing basketball? Well, I'm going to go home and have dinner. And then what? Well, I'm going to take a shower and get ready for bed. And then what? Well, I'm going to go to sleep. And then what? Well, I'm going to get up and go to work. And then what? Well, I'm going to come home. And then what? Kind of frustrated, the person says, I'm going to live the rest of my life. And then what? Well, then I'm going to die. And they would think the guy's done, but he still comes back with, and then what? Then what? Have you ever considered what will happen to you when you're done living this life? The Bible tells us about that. And just with that, and then what? You get people to thinking, oh, never thought about my last breath, my funeral, where I'm going to be when people are at my funeral. But by using the word then what, in 60 seconds, you can go from there to there. I want to look at something else this morning. How many of you feel that you could present the gospel clearly in 2 minutes or less? Now, you don't got to raise your hands. Could present the gospel clearly in 2 minutes or less. Really, it's probably easier than you think. There's probably 5 things that you would like to include. Man was created by God. Man was separated by God due to his sins, and then was destined for an eternity away from God. Jesus came to save us from that. Jesus earned the role as Savior when he rose from the dead. And when fallen man comes to Jesus, he saves them. I need 3 volunteers. 3 volunteers. I want to do this. I've showed this once before using teddy bears, but I want to use this. I need 3 volunteers. Don't all jump at once. Brooks, my wife is recruited. I need 1 more. Todd's going to do it. Heaven, you're off the hook. Dorothy's volunteering heaven, man. I'm not sure that works that way. All right, Pam and Brooks and Todd, just stand right up here. Pam, I want you to stand here. And Brooks, I want you to stand right where you're at and face Pam. And Todd, you come stand up here in the first step with me. Here's how this works. And I've showed this before with teddy bears, and you've probably seen this, but this started out with a relationship. Man has a relationship with God. is this Garden of Eden. This is how it began. But man didn't listen to God and turns his back on him. Says, I'm going to do things my own way. I'm going to take of the fruit even though you told me not to. God, in all of his holiness, cannot look at man's sinfulness, so he turns away from man. And that's how it was for centuries until Jesus comes in, and he stands between the two. When we find several verses that talks about Jesus being the mediator between man and God, when Jesus comes and stands between man and God, God can look at Jesus. Our role is to get people to look at Jesus. That's our role. Get people to come to this Jesus. Let's give our volunteers a hand. There you go. Thank you, guys. Todd, Brooks, and Pam, thank you. I have done that illustration with teddy bears. I have done that with salt shakers. I've done it with menus. I've done it with ink pens. You got to turn a little ink pen around. But you can do it. You can present the gospel one way or another. Find a way to do it. Find a way to present the gospel. Whatever works best for you. But not doing it isn't working well. All right? I had a wrestler in our wrestling team. We were a very good wrestling team, and we had a guy that was a 2-time state champion. And his senior year, he'd won 60 matches in a row, and they were all pins. He was a great wrestler. He had 3 brothers. They were all state champions. And we went to this tournament where we went in the locker room, and there was this guy as big as a house in the locker room. And the guy on our team, the 2-time state champion, his name was Mike Severn. And we started saying, hey, Mike, what are you going to do if you got to wrestle that guy? And Mike said this. It was interesting. He says, I don't know exactly what I will do, but I will find a way to win. And they met that evening, and Mike found a way to win. Find a way to share the gospel. Find a way, whatever it takes. There might be some obstacles. Maybe you are shy. You got to write a letter. Find a way. Find a way. Use teddy bears. Use 3 people. Use salt shakers. Find a way to present the gospel. D.L. Moody said this. When some people criticize his methods of sharing the gospel, he said, I like the way that I'm doing it better than the way you're not doing it. All right? I like the way I'm sharing the gospel better than the way that you're not. Charles Hayden Spurgeon invented something called the wordless book. The wordless book. And we got these screens here, and I've got this wordless book. And these are in the track box on the way out, so if you want to grab some, you can. The wordless book works something like this. There was initially 3 colors, black, red, and white. Black, we got just a black screen? Black represented sin. You know, you can take this wordless book, there's nothing I even got to read. We're sinful people. Our sins make us black, and we're offensive to God. But Jesus came and shed his blood, a red screen. Jesus came and shed his blood because he loved us. And his blood washed us clean. And the next one is white. Several years later, D.L. Moody comes along and adds a 4th color, gold. If you embrace Christ, someday you can be with him in heaven and walk streets of gold. And then CEF came along a couple of decades later and added green and said, between now and the time you walk on streets of gold, don't forget to grow. Green reminds you to grow. To be growing spiritually. Black, red, white, gold, and green. Fits in your pocket. Find a way. Again, there's some of those out there in the foyer. If you want to take them with you, give you an opportunity to share the gospel. By the way, those things have been made now, those colors. They are in bracelets, they're in banners, they're in various sporting goods, including volleyballs and soccer balls and basketballs. They have them at churches where you're playing basketball with a basketball that's 5 different colors. That's why. At time out, I can share with somebody by just having the basketball in my hand. There are plenty of methods to present the gospel of Jesus. It might take a little boldness. Mostly it takes a desire to obey God and a care and concern for people. So get comfortable talking about God. Get comfortable talking about Jesus. You can say things like, you know what I learned about God this week? You know what God did for me this week? I got all green lights on the way to work. By the way, man, you know what God does for me every day? I get all the way to work without a single red light. I live right there. But anyway, what did God do for you this week? You can start by saying, you know what God did for me this week? Do you know what I learned about God this week? Did you see the awesome sunrise that God made for us today? Or the sunset that God made for us yesterday? Do you know what we're learning at church or Sunday school? Find a way to share the gospel. Write a letter, take someone to dinner, visit someone's home, invite someone over to your house, make a phone call, but find a way. We have a track rack in the foyer. It's usually stuffed. I try to keep it full. Take tracks if you need to. There's a C.O.R box on the pew in the foyer. When you go out, you can take whatever you want from that as long as you'll use it. In the bulletin today, there's an insert that tells you places where you can leave tracks. You can leave them in a restaurant. You can leave them in a restroom. You can leave them in a rental car at the airport. Wherever you go, you can leave a tract to share with somebody. But ultimately, be ready to share the gospel. Don't leave all the work to the tract itself. There's a list in the bulletin. You can take as many as you want. A few more things and we'll be done. Number one, accept that some people are never going to accept. You try once and somebody rejects, don't give up. If you were at Sunday school, you saw this thing that says 15 times. I remember the first time I heard the gospel, I didn't accept. It wasn't until about 8 or 10 years later when I first accepted. So just because you shared and someone didn't accept doesn't mean you failed. The only failure is the failure to try. Accept that some are never going to accept. Some will reject, but some will accept. And think about what happens there. That changes their eternity for the ones that will accept. Just a few more things. There are added benefits to sharing the gospel. There are added benefits that come to us when we share the gospel. Number one, we start praying more because we're praying about the people we're sharing with. Number two, we start reading our Bible more. I got to answer that guy's question. He's got a question. I got to find the answer. You start digging your Bible more. And number three, we start fellowshipping with others because we call and say, hey, this guy asked me this question today. I was sharing with this person at the gas station, and they asked me this. I wonder if you got the answer. And all of a sudden, you're using other people that you might not have called or talked to. So there were some benefits that come from sharing the gospel. Listen, last Sunday night, there was a football game. And at least one team, when they got done huddling, and they would meet together for a huddle, and both teams did this, but the guys would get together, and they would have this little huddle, and they would say what the game plan was, and then they would break huddle and go out and get the job done. In just a moment, we're going to break a huddle with a prayer, and I want us to go out and get the job done. You need me to shut this off for a second, Jake? Okay. In just a minute, we're going to break our huddle, and we're going to leave here. But we should leave here committed to getting the job done. 42-8. Make it win. We should win. But we got to be committed to getting out and get the job done. We're going to break huddle. So we're going to close here in prayer in just a moment. And then we're going to go out into the world and hopefully share the love of Christ with people around us today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And keep doing it. Find a way to share Jesus with somebody. And again, if you're here this morning and you're not absolutely certain that you have a saving relationship with Jesus Christ, come talk to myself at the close of the service, and I'd love to share with you how you can know that you have a home in heaven relationship with Jesus Christ. Let's stand and be dismissed in a word of prayer. Father, help us to have a concern for souls, great enough concern to take your truths and share your love with people around us. Lord, help us to be a people that are eager to find a way that works for us. Help us not to make the excuses. Help us to be the kind of people that will find a way to share your gospel and your truth with others for your glory. In Jesus' name.